Oh, hey everybody, how you doing? Merry after Christmas, Boxing Day. Merry Boxing Day, which I just recently found out doesn't actually involve boxing. But, yeah, did you guys have a good Christmas? I know I had a Crachun very cheat. Interesting experience with it, but anyway, I got this book at the end of it, and that's all that matters. Atlas Obscura, because geography is everything. I feel like I've been saying it enough that you have probably picked up on that. I'm gonna scale back geography is everything next year. My goal is to only say that phrase no more than 10 times next year, so we'll see how that's gonna go there. This is actually a really good book, though. It's basically a compendium of all the weird stuff that is found in the world. And here's like a giant pineapple, and here's a giant man with a bucket on his head holding a shotgun. You know, that's a thing. So, yeah, if you could get yourself a copy of this, a great book. Okay, so I know I just did an episode of Geography is Everything a few days ago for the charity drive. We did Chopper's video, Drum Island. But I gotta get back on the bandwagon. I gotta finish up this series talking about the four blues. Alright, and today's video, with that in mind, we're going to the north! Also known as Germa Funtime Land, but right now, the North! Okay, so I know for a fact I've said this multiple times, and yes, it does happen to me every now and then. I become consciously aware that I've been repeating myself quite a bit, but I'll just start off the video with it. I believe the North Blue is the strongest sea. Alright, it hasn't been confirmed. Oda didn't say one way or the other. The only thing we got on that end is that Oda came out and said that the East Blue is considered the weakest. The average bounty of most pirates in the East is around 5 million, alright, which that number doesn't sound very impressive right now, of course, you know, with Luffy bouncing around town with a 1.5 billion berry, hard on, basically. But, you gotta consider it, relative to where we're at right now. I mean, we're in the new world. We're at Wano right now. We're gonna have some strong customers. But hey, if you scale that back a bit to the four blues, you're not gonna have that many strong pirates. And if you are going to have a strong pirate, it's probably going to be the case where they're gonna go from their blue into the Grand Line eventually, right? So I would have really liked it for Oda to give us the average bounty of each one of the blues early on. That would have been a cool thing. Like, the average bounty in the East is 5 million, in the South it's 7 million, in the West it's 10 million, but in the North Blue it's like 15 or 20 million. Once again, not all that impressive, but, compared to everywhere else in the world, it would be the most dangerous. I think it's the most dangerous sea, personally, because you have the Germa originating from there, you had the Doflamingo pirates coming from there, you had Hawkins and Drake, two of the supernovas, Sakazuki and Borsalino, two admirals, came from the north. Every time that we've seen the north, especially the areas where, like, Doflamingo and the whole thing with Corazon and Law, it's usually like a rough and tumble kind of place. That place where Doflamingo grew up, Spider Miles, did not seem like a very pleasant place to live. Then you had the whole thing with Diaz Barrels, who is Diaz Drake, ex-Drake's father. He had a giant pirate crew, and he was ransoming, basically, the Oppi Oppi no Mi. He was going to sell it to the Marines for like an absurd, like 5 billion berries or something. It just seems like there's a lot more pirate activity going on in the north. Then you get to the whole thing with the Germa, which we'll get to later on in the video. But yeah, so let's start off with some famous people that come from the north. Okay, so obviously, we're going to start off with the Straw Hats. We have one Straw Hat coming from the North Blue, and that is Sanji Vinsmoke. I don't think a lot of people like calling him Sanji Vinsmoke, though, because he himself doesn't really like the name. So I don't know if that, because we know his last name now. I don't know if a lot of people are going to use it or not, though, because he doesn't really consider it, he's not part of the family. But it's a cool last name, so I might switch back and forth there. Right, so we actually find out that Sanji was from the North Blue relatively early on in the series, during Jaya, when the crew is at Cricket's house and they're looking around, kind of just rummaging through his things, and Nami finds the book on Mont Blanc Noland, who is Noland the Liar, and Sanji mentions, like, oh yeah, I remember reading that book all the time. And he's like, oh, it was published in the North Blue though. And he's like, yeah, I grew up there. And it was just some random thing. It was just thrown off to the side, like, oh yeah, that's where I grew up. Anyway, about that story, because that was what the focus of the arc was about, Noland and him being a well-known liar in all of his adventures, and which we find out later to be true. And there's connections back to the Tontatas that we find out about in Dressrosa and everything. Then, of course, you have Mont Blanc Cricket, who is the descendant of Noland, who hails from the north as well, and he came all the way to the Grand Line and Giant to try to prove his ancestor right, to see if the City of Gold really does exist, and he saw it as like a competition with them. This is between me and Noland, and so he was a very rough and tough kind of guy. That was Cricket there. But yeah, the whole thing from Sanji being from the north, it was just dropped, wasn't elaborated on, and everyone was just like, oh, okay, he's from the north. That's not a big deal, right? It isn't until a little later when the significance of that is really felt. Because if you look at the One Piece world carefully, you see the Red Line is this giant mountain of a continent that literally divides it in half at the Prime Meridian. And then you have the Grand Line, which is this extremely dangerous ocean current that divides it at the equator. So wherever you're born, if you're born in one of the four blues, you're kind of locked in to that area unless you become a really strong pirate or a really strong marine and you have other methods of leaving. But if you're just a normal civilian that was born in the South Blue, you got the Grand Line, perimeter there, and then you have the Red Line. You can't just walk over the Red Line. It's a giant mountain that's extending right out of the middle of the ocean, right? So you're pretty much stuck wherever you're at. So for Sanji to be born in the north and then end up in the East Blue at the Baratier, Brook is the one that brings this up. Like, that's actually a huge deal. That means that Sanji had some connections that allowed him to literally traverse the entirety of the Red Line and then drop down on the other side. Something not easy to do. You basically have to have connections to the Marines or be, connections to a really strong pirate crew. In the case of the Germa, I don't think they would really want to be called a pirate crew. I think that would seem kind of low level to judge. He might kind of feel debased if he was referred to as a common pirate, because the whole thing with the Germa is that they're the fallen kingdom. They were the ones that for 66 days were in control of the entirety of the North Sea before they were dethroned. There was something that happened there. We don't know exactly how they lost their power, but the whole reason that Judge allied with Big Mom and everybody was trying to get back the sea that they, their ancestors ruled over for those 66 days. That was the dream of my ancestors. I'm going to avenge them, and we're going to get back what we had. Okay, so that was the whole thing there. And so they're not really a pirate crew, they're more of a kingdom, this mobile Super Sentai Kamen Rider kingdom that have access to these giant ships connected to these snails, and the snails could literally just clasp onto the side of the Red Line and just slither their way up and then plop down on the other side. It took a few weeks to do that, but they had the technology, and that's not something that a lot of other people just had lying around in the One Piece world, the ability to just pass over the Red Line, right? You also want to bring up at this point that if the Germa were so technologically advanced, and if Judge was a scientist that was working with, Vegapunk at one point, how come they didn't figure out how hot air balloons work or flying machines or anything? I feel like Oda is going to address that at some point. I've brought it up plenty of times, like maybe the government restricts the use of flying machines, like if anybody even attempts to create a flying machine, they're capped off, or, even with Vegapunk. Maybe Vegapunk was building something like that, and the world government's like, nope, you can't do it, because if something like that got into the hands of someone else, like that could destroy the entire setup that the world government has. If you could just hop into a plane or a hot air balloon and just float up to Marijois, that defeats the whole purpose of that city being this shining land that cannot be invaded, So yeah, it's probably the world government keeps a lockdown on that. If anybody even attempts to get that far into creating a plane or a blimp or a hot air balloon or anything, they're like, nope, can't happen, right? So, but giant snail ships that can scale the Red Line, that's okay. I guess because it'll give us enough time to prepare. If we look down our mountain and we see a giant snail coming up at us, that'll give us enough time to prepare for the incoming attack, you know what I mean? Alright, so of course with the Germa, you don't just have Judge, you also have his late wife, Sora, who is Sanji's mother, who is very kind. She also comes from the north, as well as all of her children, Ichiji, Niji, Yonji, and Reiju, as well as Sanji. Of course, Sanji is the only one that is not affected by all the different drug treatments and modifications that are done, and so he maintains his I don't want to say sanity, because they're the other Germas are sane. It's just they're a little bit more sociopathic. It's more like they lack the kind of emotions like guilt or remorse or joy or things like that. They just have more of like the twisted kind of emotions, right? They're still capable of like finding humor in things and stuff. It's just that most of their emotions that would bog down their lives as soldiers are removed, right? So they all come from the north, and we don't actually know what's up with the Germa right now. After the falling out with Big Mom, I don't know if they're going to stick around in the New World and they're going to find some other way to try to, get the battle power to reclaim the North, or if they're going to head back to the North immediately after leaving Big Mom. They suffered heavy losses. I mean, the Vinsmoke family themselves are okay. Like, I think Judge lost an eye, and some of the other Germa, like the other, Sanji's brothers and his sister Reiju, they might have taken some damage. But aside from that, like, they lost a lot of soldiers in that battle. Like, some of the clone troops that they had, a lot of them were capped off in that battle. So, I would assume they would try to retreat somewhere quiet for a while, maybe just try to find some abandoned island in the New World and just kind of park their kingdom there for the time being, and until they can build up some more clone troopers or whatever, and they can heal their wounds and figure out what they're going to do after this, if they're going to try to continue into the New World, maybe find something else that they could use, or if they're going to just go back to the North. I'm not really sure there, but I want to see the Germa again. It's probably going to be a while until we see them again, because we just had a whole arc focused on them. But yeah, I mean, Sanji has the raid suit now, number 3, so we're probably going to see that busted out in Wano, and much to, I'm sure, his chagrin, he's going to be like, oh man, I'm facing off against Queen right now, I have no other option, I gotta use this damn thing, and boop. It would be hilarious if when Niji gave him that, like, it's still a battle suit. Like, he could still fight with it, but it's been modified to have, like, loser written on it or something. Like, like, worthless Vinsmoke written right on it. And Sanji's like, damn it, Niji! But it could he still works. Like, he can modify or amplify his Diable Jambe. That would be really cool, because people have thrown out, like, his element would be fire. If Ichiji's was combustion or explosions, Niji was electricity, Yonji seemed to be physical modification. He had that robotic arm. Reiju was poison, Judge's was, spear. He had the element of spear. I have a giant spear, that's my element. But Sanji's would be fire, because he has the Diable Jambe, so maybe with the suit, maybe it could extend the powers of Diable Jambe to all of his limbs or something, or he could light his entire body on fire, or he could shoot fire, or something of that nature. That'd be really cool. Some of the other Vinsmokes, like Niji, he got a weapon, that, like, phaser sword thing. Maybe Sanji might get a weapon that allows him to, like, like a long mace or something, and fire comes out of it, and bam, he slams into opponents that way. I mean, it would be a different kind of fighting style, but hey, I could see Sanji working with that. Maybe it's like some sort of like thing attached to his shoe, like he does a spin kick or something, and then it shoots out something out of his boot and it slams into the opponent like a hammer or something. I'm just throwing out ideas. But yeah, the Vinsmoke lineage is definitely going to be realized during Wano. I'm sure that's when the raid suit is going to be busted out. But for the actual return of the Germa Kingdom proper, I don't know when that's going to happen. I did get them to help out with my charity stream, though, a few days ago. They were the halftime show entertainment. Don't even ask me how hard it was to get those guys to agree to that.
Le halftime.
You guys suck! So moving on to some other important people in the North Blue, now let's talk about Doflamingo and his merry band. So, Doflamingo actually did not come from the North Blue. He wasn't born there. So I'm looking at the thumbnail and I'm like, oh man, should I change it? But Doflamingo has so many connections to the North, and he was born technically in Marijois, but at a very young age, his father, Homing, moved the entire family to some random island that wasn't allied with the world government in the North. And so they were living there for most of their childhood, and then after that, that's where he ran into Treble and Diamante and Pika and Virgo, and they started the crew there, and so he's lived more of his life in the north than in Marijois, most certainly, right? So I guess I'll just go with that. And also, of course, Doflamingo has connections to Law, and then Corazon, who is, of course, his brother. Not Law's brother. Well, okay, he's Doflamingo's biological brother, but not in spirit, and he's not Law's brother, but he is in spirit. That's Corazon right there. Alright, so yeah, that kind of involves everything at once here, so let's just tackle that. Okay, so at a very young age, after their family got moved to the north, Homing was kind of an idiot. He was a well-meaning idiot, but he was still kind of an idiot. He didn't know that, hey, if I just go around and announce myself as a former Tenryubito, people are gonna hate me and kind of try to kill me. He was very nonchalant with this. People found out that there are some ex-Tenryubito that moved to their island. Keep in mind, something we just found out a few, chapters ago, is that the Tenryubito only accepts islands to be part of the world government if they can offer tribute in terms of money. So whenever you come across an island that's not allied with the world government, most of the time that is not by choice. That's because they don't have enough money. It's a poor country. They don't have enough money to offer to the Tenryubito. Now there are exceptions to this, like with Wano. Wano is an isolated country by choice. Alright, but when you come to, like, the country, the land that, the Doflamingo family moved to, or the Don Quixote family at this point, yeah, they didn't have enough money there in that country, so that's why they're not part of the Tenryubito, and rather, they really despise the Tenryubito. So they found out that Homing and his family was living there, they burned their mansion down, they were forced to live in a garbage heap. That's where Doflamingo's mother passed away, because of the filthy living conditions, and eventually Homing and Corazon and Doflamingo were basically crucified, and set on fire by an angry towns mob, and then that's when Doflamingo awakened his conquerors and was able to free himself. He took his own father's life and attempted to return to Marijois. Something happened with Roshinate, and he fled. He got away. Something happened there. They lost track with each other. He eventually got found by Sengoku, who was raised to become a marine. So everyone kind of got scattered at that point there. Eventually, though, Doflamingo runs into Treble and Diamante, and they present Doflamingo with the tools necessary in order to become a great ruler, a king, because Doflamingo exhibited the conqueror's hockey at a young age, so they're like, you will be our master, and you will lead us on the path to glory, okay? You will reclaim all that you have lost. We will provide the tools for you to do that. So Treble gave him a gun and the Ito Ito no Mi at a young age, and then he used that power to amass the Doflamingo family over the years, with the first members being Treble, Diamante, Virgo, eventually Pika, and then eventually like Giola, and Derringer was born. Derringer was just a little baby during the flashback with Law and everybody. Baby 5 was only a little girl. Buffalo was pretty young too, he was a teenager as well. But after amassing this criminal syndicate at Spider Miles, which was this massive like garbage dump kind of area, which apparently is filled with a lot of spiders, I guess. Spiders for miles. Wouldn't that be an arachnologist's just dream? I actually like spiders. That would be okay. That would be a little creepy even for me if there's like spiders crawling everywhere. But anyway, this is at the point right around the same time when they started gaining power. We cut over to the city of Fevens, which is the White Town, alright, which is located in the north as well. So, the White Town got its name not just because of the architecture, all the buildings and stuff were a sparkly white, and even the streets were lined with white. It was because of the amber lead, which was this ore that was mined in the area, and the world government found out about it very early on when they began mining the stuff, that it was toxic to humans, but it worked very differently than most substances. It's not like this stuff is, as soon as you come in contact with it, you get sick and you die. Rather, amber lead is something that takes a long time to poison you, right? And if the more you handle it, the more toxic it becomes. So, over the generations, you eventually get to the point where, like, 4 generations were afflicted with this amber lead, and the symptoms of amber lead syndrome, which are white splotches on your skin, all begin to erupt at the same time. So, for instance, let's say there was one of the first miners or, like, prospectors, like, oh boy, howdy, we're gonna mine ourselves some amber lead, boys! And they go down and there's, like, let's say they're 20 years old and they start mining the amber lead. Not a big deal, and that stuff is really valuable, and they were selling it to people in the neighboring lands, and they got the country of Fevens built up, and the White Town, it looked great. Let's say that 20-year-old prospector then is now 40 years old, and he has a kid, and that kid grows up, And by the time that kid is 20 and the prospector is 60, that, you know, the 20-year-old kid has his own kid, and that just continues on with the family line there. By the time the original prospector is like 80, and then he has like a 40-year-old son and a 20-year-old son, like grandson, and then like a 2-year-old great-grandson, boom, that's when Amber Lead kicks in, and all 4 generations are afflicted at the exact same time, and they don't have long to live after that. The youngest one, the 2-year-old that would have been afflicted with it, for instance, through the genes that they passed down, would only live for a few years at that point, okay? So that's the way the disease worked. The government purposely spread false information about the disease, as well as the royal family of Fevens. They basically just hauled ass and got out of there, and just, like, you know, cashed in all their chips, and like, have fun! And just abandoned their kingdom to ruin. The world government made it seem like it was some kind of plague that was coming from Fevens. This horrible plague. It's highly infectious. Don't touch or, you know, go in contact with anybody from the Fevens, the White Town, or you'll get this horrible disease and you'll die. That part wasn't true. Amber Lead was a poisoning that affects only those that were directly affected by the Amber Lead and through the generations. It's not something you can just contract by touching someone that was afflicted with it, okay? But the world government is the master of propaganda, so they spread this lie all over the world, and even other doctors in the world were completely oblivious to the nature here, to the point where they wouldn't even, Corazon brought Law to this giant hospital and was like, oh, here you go, he has Amber Lead syndrome, fix him up, and the doctors didn't even run any tests or anything. They're just like, get him out of here, get him out of here, burn the witch! It's like, oh yeah, that's great, Hippocratic oath, doctor, you're doing great. Corazon burned the hospital down a la Joker, so everything's good at the end of the day. No, actually, it's not. That was a horrible day trip that Corazon and Law went on there. Multiple other hospitals all had the same exact results. You know, they wouldn't even bother looking at Law. They wouldn't do anything to even test to see if what he had was contagious or not. They just immediately viewed him as having like a horrible illness that was going to kill everybody in the hospital. Now, granted, you know, like if you showed up at a hospital today and you had some highly infectious disease, like if you showed up at the hospital and it's like, I have the flesh-eating virus, or some horrible, like, I have bubonic plague, please help me, blah, you know, they wouldn't just turn you, they was like, oh, we can't help you, get out of here. Now they'd be like, alright, quarantine everybody, shut everything down, lock him up in like an isolated room, we need to figure out what we're gonna do here, sterilize, burn everything, but we're gonna figure this out, alright? But yeah, the doctors in One Piece, not so much. I think it's more just because of the world government, you know, the world government said, you know, don't you know, contact anybody from Fevens, and that place was destroyed. It was like a government quarantine, and everybody was wiped out. The only way Law was able to escape was because he hid in a pile of corpses. His family all was killed, his parents, his sister. Oh yeah, Law had a sister, Lamy. Remember Lamy? Remember her? Yeah, Law's sister. She's dead now. So at this point, though, Law really had no outlooks on life after watching what happened to his family. Law's father was a doctor, okay? So Law himself knew he was gonna die, and he was a young little kid, but he kind of just, you know, made peace with that, and he just strapped himself up with the grenades, and he walked into Doflamingo's area. He's like, well, I'm gonna die anyway. So that's where they ended up meeting there, and that ended up, you know, Law running into Corazon and their friendship and kind of like brotherly bond that they had. This, of course, all comes to a head at Swallow Island. So what happened here is that you had the deal between the Marines and the Diaz Barrels, the Barrels pirates, okay? So Diaz Barrels is Diaz Drake's father, okay? And you actually get to see Drake in the backstory. He's kind of this, he's supposedly 19 years old here, but because Barrels was an abusive drunk of a father and he also starved his son, he looks a little bit younger than that. He's kind of emaciated, but yeah, this is Drake at 19 years old, right? And so he comes from this area as well. The X-Drake's family line is pretty messed up when you think about it. Let me just run through it really quick here, because Diaz Barrels isn't that much of an interesting character, but his backstory kind of is, okay? So Diaz Barrels grew up as a Marine, and then at some point he decided to abandon the Marines, turn traitor, and become a pirate. And then he has a son that he physically abused, who is X-Drake. After the whole incident with Corazon and the Doflamingo family and the Marines arriving at Swallow Island, Barrels gets taken in, or killed, one of the two. I can't really remember what the fate of Barrels was, but he's not in the picture anymore. Drake managed to get away. He got aboard a Marine ship, and he got taken away, and he becomes a Marine himself, just like his father did at the beginning. And then at some point, something happened with Drake, don't know the circumstances here, where he decided to do the same thing as his father and abandon the Marines as well. So it's kind of like a vicious circle with Drake's family. And now Drake is a pirate, admittedly a much more impressive pirate than his father, his old pappy was. And now he's a supernova and a headliner on Kaido's crew, the Beast Pirates. So yeah, I just find it funny because I'm like, wait. The dad was a Marine, but then a pirate, but then the son was a Marine and then also defected and became a pirate? What's up with this family? It would be really crazy if, because obviously Drake hates his father for everything he put him through, and Drake was probably like, when he got saved by the Marines at Swallow Island, he was like, you know what, I'm going to dedicate my life to being a Marine, and I'm going to do the things that my dad, couldn't do. I'm going to be a good Marine, damn it. And then maybe Drake found out about something, maybe the same thing his father found out about, and Drake really got put off of the Marines, and he was like, wow, this is why my father defected. Holy crap, I don't like my father, but I can't stand for this. And then he decided to hightail it out of the Marines as well. So we're going to find out about the backstory of Drake at some point. I hope it's in this arc, because Drake hasn't made an appearance yet, but he's been name dropped. He's in the country, yeah. So that's with Law and the Doflamingo family. This is, of course, a discussion just on the geography of the North, so we're not going to go too much into detail. I actually have a video planned. I'm going to get on it. It's probably going to be the first big video of the year of 2019. Like last year, my first video was like the Gorosei video. That was like my first big project. This first big project for the start of the new year is probably going to be my video on the Doflamingo family. We're going to go through all of the different members: Pika, Treble, Diamante, Gladys. I feel like a lot of people don't talk about Gladys. He had a cool design. Jola, Lao Chi, all that stuff. We're going to do a big compendium video on those guys, so don't worry about it. That's coming up pretty soon. Okay. Oh, and along with that, before I forget, Swallow Island was the island where the deal went down and shit hit the fan, but that map also revealed a few other locations. Minion Island, which is where Corazon's meeting spot was, where he would contact Sengoku, and then you also had Rubeck Island, which I believe is where the Doflamingo family was staying at until the deal with Barrels occurred, and they were hoping to grab the Oppi Oppi no Mi for themselves. So yeah, that's the North there. What else? I think there's only a few other characters from there. Ben Beckman is from the North, who is now known as the most intelligent man in the entire East Blue, which is actually kind of weird because the way Otis said that at the beginning, it seemed like Ben Beckman was from the East. So Ben Beckman is the smartest man that wasn't born in the East, but lived in the East for a time. That's a little confusing. Oda might have maybe forgotten about that a little bit, because Nami was born in the East, and Kuro was the second most intelligent, and he was born in the East. Ben Beckman's the smartest guy in the East, but he wasn't born in the East. Okay, that's a little weird. Hawkins and Drake, I always mentioned them already. Hawkins, don't really know much more about his backstory. We got the whole thing with Drake coming from there. We got to see him as a little kid. We got to see his father. But we don't really get to see a lot with Hawkins' backstory. But he does, in fact, come from the North. Maybe he came from, Taro Island, or maybe an island full of, traveling fortune tellers or something. That would be really cool. Maybe his family was, nomadic, and they would travel to various islands and read fortunes and stuff for money, and then he decided to, maybe he ate the straw fruit and decided to become a pirate someday. Maybe that was Hawkins' backstory. That would have been pretty cool if it was a nomadic thing. We also have a few Whitebeard commanders. We got Vista, Flower Sword Vista. We have Thatch, who is currently yep, no longer with us. And then Fossa. Fossa being just the 15th Division commander who uses a flaming sword and smokes about 20 cigars a day. So, okay there. And then finally, all that we have left here is, I put down Sakazuki and Borsalino. So, Fleet Admiral Sakazuki, formerly Akainu, and then Kizaru, who is Borsalino, they both come from the North as well. Also kind of lend me to believe that, yeah, the North Blue, pretty tough kind of place. And as for the Germa itself, this painting that we see with Judge lording over a bunch of defeated kings, they might have very well have been past kings of the various lands in the North, and maybe there was 4 or 5 major kingdoms in the North that ruled over everything, and then the Germa managed to smash all of those. The kingdom where Noland came from was the Lavelle kingdom. There was also the Notice Kingdom, which is where Bellamy and Sarkis come from. I almost forgot to mention those guys. Bellamy, I mean, what do you guys think about Bellamy? Do you think he's a good character? Do you think he's been redeemed? Because after, he was just a minor villain in Mocktown. He was just like, okay, we know Luffy could kick his ass, and he did with one punch. He was just like a hyena, basically. He was like, ha 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 ha, I will ridicule you because I am a hyena. But then after everything that happened in Dressrosa and the manipulated by Doflamingo, and now he's starting a new life as a pirate flag designer, I think Bellamy is redeemed. I think he deserves another shot. He's an ally now, a de facto member of the Grand Fleet, so to speak. As for Sarkis, though, yeah, he's not around anymore. Sarkis he got taken out. But yeah, that's pretty much everything, and so as luck would have it, just like we did the My Hero Academia discussions with Izuku, the main character, being last, the East Blue, which is where most of the main characters come from, Luffy, Zoro, Usopp, Nami, they all hail from the East, and that's the place, of course, we know the most about because we had an entire saga focused on the East. That'll be the last installment for this little mini-series, so thanks for watching, everybody. Once again, hope you had a very Merry Christmas. You'll see me again before New Year's, and pick up a copy of Atlas Obscura today. Let's see here. The Abita Mystery House. Ooh, why is it mysterious? There's a crocodile riding a bicycle. So that's the reason it's mysterious, yeah.